what we are witnessing now in US, person who is epitomizing undemocratic behavior, the racism, and so on and so on. So Donald Trump is the president of the United States that's the only one, as far as I can remember in my lifetime, that didn't start a war, basically. I think he did not start at least not a single major war. So he managed to escape the potential wars in Syria, Venezuela, so Iran.
Yeah. Well, even what happened in Syria, for instance, with the Kurdish, militias, it's problematic. But yeah,
No,
of course, he's withdrawing.
I'm not defending all the policies.
Yeah. Sure,
So
no, but I see your point. It's true.
He was avoiding, while on the other hand, Barack Obama, who was given kind of advance payment Nobel Peace Prize, did not work up to it, really. He did not deliver. I mean, the world that he was governing was a world where one very important thing was happening in the United States, Medicare. This is something that we have to really give credits to his administration. This is a big move. This is a big thing, especially knowing the context of United States, where for many this is unimaginable. And now for our European standards, this is definitely not enough, I would say, but still in America, this is on the other side, the wars that were happening around the world, like the Syria, Libya. Libya was, okay, not directly US, but obviously US were involved. So he did not live up to the credits that he was given. And now I'm somehow puzzled how the guy who is considered the evil itself internally is on the outside not as bad, at least when it comes to the results of peace and war and number of killed, etc., etc. On the other side, a guy who was considered as a potential
savior
breakthrough in all of the good matters is somehow really not followed by this track record. So this is, and now please try to connect this with this, I would say, failure and betrayal of liberal elites that maybe was fueling this, because when you say that emptying the meaning of freedom, for me in a real social world, it means it is a betrayal of liberal elites. Liberal elites allowed it to happen. They were really having it to ring as an empty bell. So what would be your comment?
Yeah, because liberal elites actually were, in a way, focusing on the, probably on the sort of freedom side, and perhaps forgetting somehow the equality side of the equation. This could be an explanation.
Freedom side was mainly market freedom.
Market freedom, absolutely, yes. I should absolutely. It's not a trade-off, and it's not a trade-off in any way. Even if you look at empirical research on democracy, freedom and equality is never a trade-off. But yes, I would say that the easy answer would be that the liberal elites were absolutely focusing on the profit side of the equation, the market side of the equation, leaving behind all the rest. I agree with your analysis, I must say, with the fact that, probably Trump, seen from the outside, as like, let's take an external standpoint, is absolutely not the evil that it's portrayed to be. And I find it fascinating, for instance, I mean, in a sad way, probably, that, for instance, I see these comparisons between George W. Bush and Trump, where George W. Bush is considered to be the great guy, as compared to Donald Trump. But honestly, the legacy of George W. Bush compared to the legacy of Trump, we don't know much about the legacy of Trump. We will see in the coming years. But even just think about it, even just Iraq.
Sorry, just to add, not only external legacy like Iraq, but the Patriot Act inside, within United States of America. For me, Patriot Act is basically surrender to the non-liberal people.
But so people did not perceive it that way. And 9/11 gave the government an almost absolute power. If you think about it, it's a matter of perception of the people. It was impossible at that time, historical time, to really stand up against the Patriot Act, because they would have presented you as an enemy of your own country. So it was very problematic, politically speaking. And we know that big events like 9/11 generate this kind of a rally around the flag effect that empowers the government to do many things that they would never get away with otherwise. And I'm talking about Iraq, especially, not so much about Afghanistan, which could have, it could have been reasonable in many ways, but Iraq is like, it's unbelievable. And I totally agree. I mean, I think that even compared with Obama, I mean, political capital is not, is a limited resource, I think. So every president, every political leader has this much political capital, and they need to sort of decide on what to invest, right? And clearly, Obama was investing much on the domestic. We talked about the Medicare, the healthcare issue, and not other issues that remain completely, I would say, unaddressed. And we could talk about, for instance, racial issues. We could talk about arm control. That we also had different crises, and even the emergence of different movements, even among the very young people in the US, because these issues have not been addressed, even by those who were embodying the liberal elites that you are mentioning. But again, I think it's a contradiction of those who defend liberal values. I think that one of the reasons why Trump is very successful is very similar to the reasons why, for instance, in Italy, people like Salvini are popular. I don't know if you know this right-wing leader Salvini. And the reason is that they, in a way, they look to the audience, they look more consistent than the opponents. So Trump, in many ways, to his electorate, looks much more consistent than liberal, politicians, maybe, who, talk about human rights a lot. They, insist on these use these big keywords, but then they don't deliver, simply because they don't want to really touch certain sort of vested interests that are involved with. Okay, and this is the big, in Italy, we're seeing this, just to jump on the other side of the ocean, but we're seeing this now with the Democratic Party, which it's been in a crisis because it's been, running behind right-wing populist parties. They just voted, a supposedly left-wing party voted for, renewing the funding to the Libyan Guard cost. So how can you credibly talk about human rights when you do something like this? And we have all sorts of issues like this in the US. So which were, of course, exacerbated by the current crisis. So I don't know. I suppose that that I agree with you in general, with your take on ironically recognizing that.
Because I find myself in an awkward position once Bernie Sanders is out. The one who I see really as the only potential savior of United States of America. Now, in this choice between Biden and Trump, it's really a choice for me, how I see it, between problematic international policies and a cover-up on internal matters, cover-up of deep-rooted social injustices and racism, and on the other side, as well, problematic international policies, however, the less problematic because it's less aggressive than with the issue of American first concept and all the others. And on the other side, a blunt exposure of all deficiencies of the system, really like, okay, racism, yes, we are racist. But look,
again,
bad. Is it bad to admit, yes, there is a serious racist issue in this system? I think it's better to accept that this is something that is not going on only in this administration. This is something that was going on even in Obama administration. This is not something that really happened now. Davor, what would you?
Yeah. Well, I found myself. First of all, is it not interesting that we're talking about Sanders as the only one? Because there were other candidates, but for instance, Warren, why wasn't she even, an option? There is a gender issue. No, I'm saying like
Sanders coming at the end as
it's a radical answer. It's a radical answer. I think that liberal elites are not ready or not willing to embrace that kind of radical answer. And of course, we talk radical in context, right? Because what's radical in the US is probably conservative or...
Yeah. I think, Davor, I will quote you. He would be a center in a
exactly.
European political spectrum.
Right. Well, but that is precisely the point. One thing is that even people perceive Bernie Sanders as a crazy radical or communist, but I think his policies are something that would appeal to the Republican Party, 60, 70 years ago. So it's actually very moderate, and there is nothing radical about it. Actually, even too conservative or too right wing, if you ask me. But it's something unthinkable. So there is one element of this we shouldn't forget, that the United States, its society, is deep conservative society. So like Hollywood movies do not actually portray all the elements that are important there. And in order to make certain narrative attractive enough, it's not enough that the narrative and the policies appeal to the majority of the population. It is important that they appeal to those who will finance all the campaign and who will finally then find their interest in having certain policy and certain people behind that policy being the official one. And that's a complicated process, which is not just one-way street, but actually needs to speak to a multiple interests, and in a society that is structured the way it is. But I would go back to just this point, which I think was an important one in your previous discussion between two of you, how on the one hand the concept of democracy or human rights gets monopolized, so that certain power structures, whether it be states or international business conglomerates, start using those concepts again, emptying them of their real narrative, and then using them for their own purposes. So that also speaks to the previous point about reclaiming these values and giving these concepts real content. Why this is important? It is important because it's a powerful ideological narrative. When you claim, it gives those who come up with it, it gives high moral standing. You are defending, you're promoting freedom, you're promoting democracy, you're liberating people. That's wonderful. And when you see the context out of which that came, you can understand the value of it. Just as the European Union came out of this post-World War II context, and then saying, well, look, we are actually against totalitarianisms, whether they are right-wing or left-wing and so on and so forth. We are generally standing for democracy. The problem that happened is that concept got monopolized and used by the business sector and essentially capitalist mindset in its symbiosis with state power. At that point, it empties these concepts of their real narrative. So you end up in a paradoxical situation, which is paradoxical only superficially, of course, that the richest country in the world has some of the worst outcomes when it comes to all sorts, point after point after point. So where you have such an incredible poverty that's unimaginable in the rest of the industrial countries, and where you effectively have democracy suspended, but you can use the narrative still to keep perpetuating certain power structures internally and, of course, externally. So I think it is important at this point to clearly disentangle capitalism and power of various kinds and the concepts of freedom and democracy, the rule of law, and so on, and think them afresh. Second point about Trump, it's somebody already mentioned that and noticed, ideas have sometimes strange history and strange manifestations. If we go back to the 1990s and the image of the Balkans that was promoted, it was, and particular political figures from the Balkans, it was portrayed in Western media as, these kind of insanities going on in this crazy place called the Balkans. So atavisms of various kinds, and brutal people who are just disgraceful, don't respect any civilized standards, are brutal, do all sorts of insane things. How that ideological projection actually moved from the Balkans to the very core of the imperial power nowadays, sitting in the White House. So that actually the circle, in a certain sense, went all the way back to where those ideological narratives, partly, not completely, of course, started. And that also then speaks to the third point I wanted to mention about how to think of these internal and external policies. What I've always been claiming is that there is absolutely no connection when we look either at the present context or historically between inner design of the system and its values and external policies. You can have pretty reasonably developed democratic structures internally and aggressive, oppressive external policies, and vice versa. You can have authoritarian structures internally and pretty peaceful and compromising relations externally. So a common mistake that people make, and also some scholars, is automatically assuming that if a country has certain amount, I don't know many countries that have something that kind of really functioning democracy, but maybe there are a couple, but some kind of functioning democratic system by comparative standards, it doesn't mean at all that the way that country or its allies will behave in external relations will actually reflect any of these values. So sometimes these values will be used, as we said, as ideological pretexts in order to launch aggressive wars or put some pressure on other governments and so on and so forth. But I think it is important to understand that that link just doesn't work in practice, and that very often, and I think that's always important to remember and stress, that one and the same concept and one and the same ideological narrative, formally speaking, can be emancipatory in one context, and then when applied to a different context, especially when the content of these concepts changes, can become very oppressive. So you can have democracy and freedoms and human rights as something that's emancipatory narrative, and that really establishes these values in concrete societies. And you can use the same narrative to oppress people in some other context. So sorry for taking that much time.
Churchill said that the fact that I am paranoid doesn't mean that I'm not followed, meaning that the fact that narratives had been built up about Balkans and Trump, the negative narratives doesn't mean that these were not deserved narratives up to a certain extent. So basically the fact that the narrative of tribalistic societies was built up on Balkans doesn't mean that they were not effective, because when we look from this side, from the inner side, they were pretty much tribalistic and monoethnic and exclusivistic, etc. However, they were painted, yes, as the evil on the earth. This is the scum of the earth.
The problem is black and white.
Sorry?
It's a black and white portrayal, because reality is so much more complex, but the average voter will not acknowledge that. So you buy into,
Basically, but at the end, the problem is that you eventually, I don't know, as a voter, you have to make a decision. So basically, yes, Trump is misogynic. I mean, this is, I would really not try even to argument this. This is obvious. He is pretty much this alt-right. So there is a lot of racist in his narratives. On the other side, you have the very nice liberal elites who are really emptying the notions, as we said, of freedom, of equality, of emancipation. And then it's a question for me, who is the bigger enemy in this respect? Those who are covering up the story with nice facade, or those who are bluntly trying to dismantle it? I'm not sure.
The challengers seem to have the upper end right now, for the reasons that you just mentioned.
But, and this is like in business, disruptors. So basically one disruption in the market economy can be good one, while in a social sense it's catastrophic one, because the society cannot adapt fast enough.